When Helldivers 2 was first announced, it showcased a playful sense of humor, explosive, high-octane action, and the promise of killing just like a ton of big bugs. There was no smoke and mirrors with its marketing. What you saw was what you got, and what you saw wasn't 1,000 planets to explore, or headlines about it being the first quadruple A game, or even a studio name that resonated with a wide group of people. It was just a game that looked fun, if a little niche. In all honesty, it was a game that I kind of overlooked when it was first announced, but that wasn't just me. I mean, for months we've been hearing about how middling PlayStation's 2024 was going to be outside of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and how their live service projects were destined to fail. Helldivers 2 was never supposed to break records or take the world by storm. And then it did. This game's success can really only be described as a runaway train. In fact, at a point it almost got too popular for its own good, as its promoted gameplay loop of chaotic, screen-shaking third-person shooting was quickly replaced by a new game. I think it's supposed to be like a roguelike or something. So much news and excitement was spreading about it so quickly that the dev team couldn't keep up with it, and the infrastructure they had set up for the game wasn't able to accommodate for the amount of new users joining each day. Helldivers 2 was too successful, although let's be honest, as far as problems go, that's not really the worst one to have. But given this unprecedented amount of success, there are a few questions that need to be asked here. First, how did this happen? How did Helldivers become so successful off of little more than word of mouth? And second, is it actually possible to recreate this success at a consistent level? Before we can answer those questions though, we need to look at some hard numbers. The original Helldivers opened to a player base on Steam of roughly 5,000 people and peaked not too long after at just shy of 7,000. It was also on PlayStation systems a few months prior to its Steam debut, and while sales on that are a little bit less clear, it seems like the original was a pretty solid, well-received, well-supported small-scale co-op shooter. Helldivers 2 is a bit of a different story. The first day of this game's release hit a peak of 64,000 concurrent players on Steam, 10xing the peak of the last game and falling just shy of God of War 2018's PlayStation record of 74,000 concurrent players on Steam. Now, that sounds like a really stellar start, and it absolutely was, but keep in mind, the jump from the last game was expected given the move from the top-down perspective to full 3D, the higher budget, and the larger marketing push behind the game. And unlike God of War, which launched on Steam over 3 years after it launched on PlayStation, Helldivers 2 launched on both simultaneously, so it's not really a one-to-one comparison. Regardless, 64,000 concurrent players on just Steam when it's been marketed as a PlayStation game is a pretty good figure to start with, and honestly, if this was the lifetime peak of the game and it just kind of kept a good percentage of that going forward for its live service elements, it probably would have been considered a very successful project by Arrowhead. 2 weeks after launch, there was a tweet from their CEO. "We expect the Helldivers 2 servers to hit the 800,000 concurrent user max capacity in 3 to 4 hours. 800,000. The game broke God of War's record the second day of its release. It became the first Sony game to pass 100,000 concurrent players on Steam the next day. It became Sony's first game to pass 200,000 players on Steam 4 days later. It became Sony's first game to pass 300,000 players on Steam 3 days after that. It became Sony's first game to pass 400,000, you get the idea. Throughout this period, its maximum server capacity was relentlessly being upgraded bit by the team. A new benchmark would be set, it would be hit within minutes, and then they had to go and work on a new temporary fix, and nothing really captures just how out of control this all got more than the same CEO coming out and basically outright saying, "Hey man, maybe like don't buy the game. I mean, buy the game, that's sick, but also way too many people are buying the game right now, so if you're on the fence, maybe just buy it later or something, I don't know." Have you ever seen a CEO act like this? This feels illegal somehow. The dude just abandoned all the fundamentals of his craft and started pulling out confusion tactics. He's the Jordan Poole of CEOs. So now that we understand just how asinine these numbers are, we can finally answer that first question. How did this happen? Well, if you ask that question on any of the internet's most fertile grounds for intellectually stimulating conversations, you'll probably get a heavy dose of answers that essentially boil down to, it's fun, man. It's just good, solid fun. Game companies really forgot that all we want is a fun game. They get so caught up in all this microtransaction and live service bullshit. You know, I remember back on the NES, get the hell out of here, you old hag, talking about the goddamn NES. Go yell at your great-grandchildren to get you a wafer on your favorite Playboy magazine, you geriatric old man. I get it. Everyone wants there to be an easy answer. They want to be able to say, God, why can't every game be like this? It puts all these other terrible AAA companies to shame. It actually knows what gamers want. But the reason this game's doing so well just can't be diluted into something that simple. Fun is everywhere. Do you know how many things are fun? Do you know how many games you're not playing right now? Games that you've probably never even heard of of that you would absolutely find fun. And do you really think in the 2, 3, 5, sometimes 10 years it takes to make these games, nobody at any point says, oh, we have to make it fun, I totally forgot. Helldivers 2 isn't putting itself in the history books because it's the first game in a while that decided to be fun. In fact, another game that just came out, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, a lot of people think that game's gameplay can be pretty fun. I mean, let's be honest, that thing's being smacked around, boiled, shredded, and thrown into a pile of horse dung by the general public, but there's still a lot of people claiming the gameplay itself was pretty fun. I mean, even I'll admit that I found it pretty fun. You want to know how it's doing? That's not to say that fun doesn't have anything to do with it. Helldivers 2 does obviously benefit from just having pure fun factor. Shooting feels tight, managing its support and artillery system mid-combat is frantic and leads to strong tactical moves, happy accidents, or organically stupid moments. And at the most base level, it's nice to watch things go boom. But there's so much more going on here. The first is how flexible the game sessions are. There's an enjoyable, playful story that doesn't need to be told through constant cutscenes, it's more of a concept than an actual narrative. And then some missions can be tackled quickly while others can be a little bit longer, and you'll know which one is which before you launch into them. Missions can either be tackled with minimal planning and while ignoring optional objectives, or you can discuss optimal routes, how to manage your time mid-mission depending on how many tools you have left, and whether or not it's worth it to retrieve supplemental currencies on your dead bodies or just haul ass to the extraction zone. Then there's incentivization. Progression, weapons, and cosmetics aren't locked behind a paywall. You can choose to use real money to get them faster, but it's all earnable just by playing the game without it being a ridiculous grind. And since battle passes are non-FOMO, meaning they don't disappear after a certain number of real-world days, players never feel forced to spend money. Things like upgrading your ship, decking yourself out with new gear, and getting more explosive tools to play with make you invested in your personal progression. Bonus points for the game showing you exactly when and how you're gonna get all that in a clear and easy to navigate menu. And then the over-the-top presentation of democracy, liberty, and this intergalactic war filled with global missions everyone's working towards makes you invested in a broader ecosystem. I mean, the game basically has a lore reason for you to play it religiously, which also makes it incredibly shareable. The focus on togetherness and the tongue-in-cheek humor of needing more soldiers to fight in this space war lend themselves really well to the real-world discussions about this game. People constantly reference the in-universe lore in posts and tweets about it, and it's enough of an in-joke for fans to lean into it, while being a simple enough concept for outsiders to understand the bit and want to be part of it. Usually when my brother and I want to play games together, we'll send a quick, hey, you want to play? Sure, I'll be on in half an hour, but when he wants me to play Helldivers, he'll send me, democracy is waiting, lock in. When people are willingly and casually talking about the game like this, it does wonders for organic marketing. Then there's the production value and price point. The game's cheaper than a full-price game and has promises of a steady stream of content drops without hitting any of the big no-no words that people hate about live services, but then it also has a level of detail you typically associate with fully priced AAA games. It's so clear the amount of work that's gone into the animations, the weather effects, the explosion effects. I mean, are you kidding me right now? Eye-grabbing content that needs no context, which feeds right back into the shareability factor. But the fact of the matter is, all of that can be true for a game that just does well, or pretty good. A game whose lifetime peak is 64,000 concurrent players, a very good but down-to-earth number, and never in its wildest dreams could it have even imagined going past 250,000. I mean, clearly that was the case here. That's why they ran into so many problems. The absolute ceiling they planned for got busted through instantly. If they had really cracked the code of what gamers want, if it was really that easy to understand and predict, then they wouldn't have been so blindsided by the amount of people that like their game. So what's the real X factor here? Luck. No one really wants to say this about a game that does this well, especially when the game is fantastic, and this one absolutely is. And to be clear, in no way am I saying that Helldivers 2 doesn't deserve its success or didn't earn it. I respect the hell out of this game, and it took a lot of work to make it into what it is now. But it also had to get really lucky. Luck isn't an exclusive thing. If you created something truly great or you're really good at marketing a product, you need less luck than the next guy over. It isn't a totally random toss-up, but you don't get numbers like these without a little good fortune. What would have happened if Helldivers 2 released in its initial 2023 window? If it had been slotted not too far from another shooter like Call of Duty, even in a bit of an off year, would it have had a harder time converting people? What if Destiny wasn't in the slump it was in right now? The Final Shape expansion was initially set to launch the same month as Helldivers 2 wound up releasing, and if the last expansion had left things on a high, then the same dissatisfied fans who found a new shared world shooter to sink their time into while their old favorite tries to clean itself up might have instead just saved up to invest in a more proven commodity instead. Titanfall 2 is a perfect example of a game, a shooter more specifically, that's fantastic and deserved success, and I've seen some people call it the best FPS ever made. I mean, they're wrong, but I've heard it. And it flopped at least partially because of its terrible release window. Now you could say that's not luck, that's just EA being stupid, but Respawn certainly got unlucky in that scenario. Absolutely none of that undermines the accomplishments of Helldivers 2, but it does bring into question just how much is even in your own hands. It also just so happens that Helldivers 2 is practically a perfect game for the current gaming market, and yeah, kudos to them for making something that targeted that, but also, this game has been in development for almost a decade, and the market was very different back then, so they couldn't have possibly predicted it this perfectly, even with some constant changes along the way. The last new multiplayer shooters to make a splash even remotely this big were probably Apex Legends and Valorant. Other than that, it's mainly been long-standing franchises giving minor facelifts to old games. And even these two are now 4 and 5 years old respectively. There's been enough breathing room and enough mistakes from other fast-paced shooter games like Overwatch, Battlefield, and Destiny for people to be open to some fresh meat. But timing's still just part of the equation, which I think the finals displays pretty well. It looks great, it plays great, it had pretty great press overall, plus it had a lot of traction going into its release. Its release numbers were actually pretty amazing as well, but unlike Helldivers' immediate uptick, these numbers immediately dropped, steadily decreasing every single week, and within 2 months the game went from 250,000 concurrent players to 23,000. Why? It feels like everything went right here. Well, it all kind of comes down to guesswork at the end of the day, but one factor, at least in my opinion, is that people still don't really know what this game is. There are still a lot of people who think the finals is a battle royale. It's not. It never claimed to be, but from a distance, it kind of looks like it would be. So now it's directly competing with games it should only be lightly connected to. I'm sure some people picked up the game thinking it was a battle royale and then dropped it after finding out it wasn't. I'm also sure some people who don't want to play battle royale games saw this game, thought, oh man, not another one, and never touched it. And I think ultimately those comparisons were a bit of bad luck. Helldivers is a really unique case. Not only is its timing impeccable, but it's also able to immediately distinguish itself from other shooters just at a quick glance, and it's close enough that those same crowds are won over. It is a strictly PvE horde co-op shooter that isn't about vampires or zombies, while also featuring military adjacent motifs and the sort of grounded, sort of ludicrously insane action people love. It also plugs in a few of the holes left by Battlefield, another franchise that's MIA right now. Even though it's not really like Battlefield, it just gives you the same feeling. None of us really knew it until we got it, but we were kind of missing a game like this, and considering this one just so happened to be amazing on top of that, it really does become a perfect game for this exact moment. Palworld just a month ago had a lot of the same X factors. It hit at a time where there weren't a ton of new major survival games coming out, a time where people are getting really tired of Pokemon doing the same thing over and over, and a time where the last casual game that everyone truly OD'd on was like 4 years ago. It's always easy to see the pattern when it's right in front of us, but especially given the time it takes to develop games, it really is a near impossible task to hit the jackpot intentionally. So when it comes to that second question I asked, can this level of success be hit consistently? I really don't think it can. Not at this level, unless you've truly established yourself as one of the biggest players in the medium, and even then, it's a bit of a toss-up. Yes, Helldivers absolutely did things that contributed to its success, and there's things that other companies should 100% learn from them. For instance, the way it's been monetized. It's not in your face, it keeps the focus on fun, and while it maybe isn't the most efficient system for squeezing the most money out of people, the fact that it can avoid the negative press around live service games means that way more people are willing to give it a chance in the first place. But ultimately, there's no formula. There's no easy answer to anything in entertainment, and even old tricks die and get replaced eventually or are super inconsistent. Sometimes you made the exact right thing at seemingly the exact right time, but somebody else took your spotlight just months prior. And while that's one of the most frustrating parts of the process, with development teams not always getting what they deserve and us not always getting the products we want, I also think it's the most exciting thing as well. Out of the blue, I became a massive Helldivers fan even though I never played the original and never paid any mind to its marketing, and out of the blue, Arrowhead can be rewarded after 9 years of hard work with a game so popular they had to ask people to stop buying it.